The wind was screaming like a wild animal outside Jake's small wooden cabin. He had been living alone in this remote mountain area for almost 4 months now, studying weather patterns for his research project. The nearest town was 30 miles away, and nobody ever came up here, especially not in winter. Jake looked at his watch. It was almost midnight, and the storm had been going on for 6 hours straight. He had seen bad weather before, but this was something else entirely. The snow was falling so hard he couldn't see past his own porch. And the wind was so strong, it made his little cabin shake like a toy. He was sitting by his wood stove, trying to stay warm while looking at his weather data on his laptop. The numbers were crazy. The wind was blowing at 80 miles per hour, and the temperature outside was minus 40 degrees. This was the kind of storm that could kill someone in minutes if they got caught outside. Jake got up to add more wood to the fire, when he heard a loud crash against his front door. At first, he thought it was just a tree branch, or some debris getting blown around by the wind. These mountain storms always threw things around. But then he heard it again, and this time it sounded different. It sounded like someone was hitting his door. He stood perfectly still, listening carefully. The wind was making so much noise it was hard to hear anything else. Then it came again, but weaker this time. It wasn't the random sound of debris hitting his door. Someone was out there, and they were pounding on his door, trying to get in. Jake's heart started racing. Who could possibly be out there in this storm? No one was supposed to be anywhere near his cabin. The hiking trails were closed for winter, and even the park rangers didn't come up here when the weather was this bad. But the pounding came again, even weaker now. And Jake knew he had to do something. He grabbed his flashlight and walked slowly toward the door. The pounding had stopped, but he could hear something else now. It sounded like someone was scratching at the door, like they were too weak to knock properly anymore. Jake put his hand on the door handle and hesitated. Every horror movie he had ever seen told him not to open that door. But his conscience wouldn't let him leave someone outside to freeze to death. Jake took a deep breath and unlocked the door. The moment he opened it, the wind hit him like a punch in the face. Snow and ice flew into his cabin, and the cold was so intense it took his breath away. But there, right in his doorway, was a figure collapsed in the snow. At first, Jake thought it was just a person in some kind of weird winter gear. The figure was covered in what looked like a shiny silver material that seemed to move and shift in the light from his flashlight. But as he knelt down to help, he realized this wasn't any kind of clothing he had ever seen before. The material looked almost alive, like it was trying to change shape. Jake reached out to help the person up. But as soon as his flashlight beam hit their face, he froze. This wasn't a person at all, at least not a human person. The face looking back at him was unlike anything he had ever seen. The head was longer than a human head, almost egg-shaped. The skin was pale, almost white, but it seemed to glow with its own light. And the eyes were huge, much bigger than human eyes. And they reflected the light from his flashlight like a cat's eyes do. But what really made Jake's blood run cold was the expression in those eyes. Pure terror. This strange being was looking at him with the same fear that Jake was feeling. They were both scared out of their minds, staring at each other in the doorway while the storm raged around them. The being tried to move backwards, away from Jake, but it was too weak. It collapsed again in the snow, and Jake could see it was shivering violently. Whatever this thing was, it was dying from the cold. The strange silver material covering its body seemed to be damaged, with pieces of it flickering and changing color like a broken TV screen. Jake's mind was racing. This had to be some kind of dream or hallucination. Things like this didn't happen in real life. But the wind and snow were real, and this being was real. It was going to die if he didn't do something right now. He made a decision. Dream or not, hallucination or not, he couldn't leave any living thing outside in this storm. Jake reached down and carefully helped the being to its feet. It was lighter than he expected, and its body felt strange, like it was made of something other than flesh and bone. The being didn't resist, but Jake could feel it trembling. And he didn't think it was just from the cold. Together, they stumbled into the cabin. Jake quickly closed the door behind them, shutting out the howling wind and flying snow. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the storm had been. Now, in the warm light of his cabin, Jake got his first real look at what he had let inside. The being was definitely female, though he couldn't say exactly how he knew that. She was tall and thin, taller than Jake, with long arms and legs. Her skin had that strange glow to it, and her hair, if it was hair, was white and seemed to float around her head like she was underwater. The silver material covering her body was definitely some kind of clothing, but it was unlike anything made on Earth. She was looking around his cabin with those huge eyes, taking in everything. The wood stove, his laptop, his research equipment, his simple furniture. But when her eyes came back to Jake, that look of terror returned. She pressed herself against the wall as far away from him as she could get. Jake realized that while he was studying her, she was studying him too. And apparently she found him just as frightening as he found her. Here they were, two completely different beings, both scared of each other. Trapped together in a tiny cabin while the worst storm in years raged outside. Neither of them could leave. The storm would kill them both if they tried to go back outside. They were stuck together until the weather cleared, and Jake had no idea how long that would take. He looked at this strange, terrified being pressed against his wall and wondered what on earth he had gotten himself into. The silence in the cabin was almost worse than the storm outside. Jake stood frozen near the door, still holding his flashlight, while the strange woman pressed herself against the far wall. Her huge eyes never left his face, and the fear in them was so intense, it made Jake's stomach turn. He had never seen anyone, human or otherwise, look so absolutely terrified. She was making sounds now, soft noises that weren't quite words but weren't random either. They sounded like a mix between whistling and humming, with strange musical tones that seemed to come from deep in her throat. Jake had never heard anything like it. The sounds were beautiful in a way, but they also made him feel uneasy, like hearing a song in a language that didn't exist. Jake tried to think of what to do. Every movie he had ever seen about aliens usually ended badly for the humans, but this being didn't look dangerous. She looked scared and hurt and cold. The silver material covering her body was definitely damaged. Parts of it were flickering, like broken lights, and other parts seemed to be changing color from silver to a dull gray. Whatever it wasn't working properly. He took a small step toward her, trying to move slowly and carefully. The moment he moved, she made a sharp sound, almost like a bird's warning cry, and tried to press herself even further into the wall. Her whole body was shaking now, and Jake realized she was probably more afraid of him than he was of her. That thought hit him like a truck. Here he was, thinking about how scared he was of this alien being, but she was just as scared of him, maybe even more scared. She was hurt and lost and trapped in a strange place with a creature she had never seen before. When Jake thought about it that way, he felt sorry for her instead of afraid. He slowly set his flashlight down on the table, pointing it toward the ceiling so it lit up the room without shining directly at her. Then he took several steps backward, giving her more space. The fear in her eyes didn't go away, but she seemed to relax just a little bit. Jake sat down in his chair by the fire, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. He kept his hands visible and moved very slowly. The woman watched his every move, but at least she wasn't trying to disappear into the wall anymore. The heat from the wood stove was filling the cabin, and Jake noticed the woman was shivering, not just from fear, but from cold. Her strange clothing might be some kind of advanced technology, but it clearly wasn't keeping her warm anymore. Jake looked at the pile of blankets on his bed, then back at her. How could he let her know he wanted to help? He picked up one of his blankets and wrapped it around himself, making exaggerated movements to show her what it was for. Then he picked up another blanket and held it out toward her, staying far away, but making it clear he was offering it to her. She stared at the blanket like it might bite her. Her head tilted to one side, and Jake got the feeling she was trying to figure out what he was doing. After a long moment, she made a soft sound that might have been a question. Jake nodded and smiled, still holding out the blanket. Very slowly, she reached out one long, thin arm toward the blanket. Her fingers were longer than human fingers, and they moved in a way that reminded Jake of a spider's legs. But when she touched the blanket, she jerked her hand back like it had burned her. She made more of those musical sounds, and Jake thought they might be words in her language. She tried again, this time letting her fingers explore the fabric. Jake could see the wonder in her eyes as she felt the soft material. Whatever her people used for clothing, it apparently wasn't anything like earth fabric. She grabbed the blanket and pulled it toward her, wrapping it around her shoulders like Jake had shown her. The relief on her face was immediate. She closed her eyes and seemed to sink into the warmth of the blanket. For the first time since she had stumbled into his cabin, she looked peaceful instead of terrified. Jake felt a little proud of himself. He had managed to help her without scaring her even more. They were still stuck together, and neither of them could talk to the other. The storm outside was still raging. Jake had no idea how long it would last. He got up slowly and went to his small kitchen area. The woman's eyes followed him, but she didn't seem as panicked as before. Jake opened a can of soup and started heating it on his camping stove. The smell of chicken soup filled the cabin, and he noticed the woman's nose wrinkled. She was clearly smelling it too. When the soup was ready, Jake poured some into a bowl and sat back down. He took a spoonful and made a show of eating it, trying to demonstrate that it was food. Then he got another bowl and poured soup into it, setting it on the floor about halfway between them. The woman stared at the bowl for a long time. Jake could almost see her mind working, trying to decide if this was some kind of trap or if he was really trying to feed her. Her stomach made a rumbling sound that was surprisingly human-like, and Jake realized she was probably hungry. She unwrapped herself from the blanket and crawled toward the bowl, keeping her eyes on Jake the whole time. When she reached it, she sniffed it carefully, then looked back at Jake. He nodded encouragingly and took another spoonful of his own soup. She dipped one long finger into the soup and tasted it. Her eyes went wide and she made a sound that Jake was pretty sure meant surprise. She tried another taste, then another. Soon she was drinking the soup straight from the bowl. Jake could see she was hungry enough to eat anything. While she ate, Jake studied her more carefully. She was definitely not human, but she wasn't completely alien either. She had 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, just like a person. Her face was different, but it still had eyes and a nose and a mouth in the right places. Her expressions were different, too, but Jake was starting to recognize some of them. Fear, curiosity, hunger, relief. Maybe they weren't so different after all. When she finished the soup, she set the bowl down carefully and looked at Jake. For the first time, there wasn't fear in her eyes. There was something else there, something that looked almost like gratitude. She made a soft sound and put her hand on her chest, then gestured toward Jake. Jake thought she might be trying to say thank you, smiled and nodded, then put his own hand on his chest and said Jake. He repeated it several times, pointing to himself. The woman listened carefully and made a sound that was almost like Jake, but with those strange musical tones mixed in. Then she put her hand on her own chest and made a series of sounds that were beautiful but completely impossible for Jake to repeat. They sat there looking at each other. 2 beings from different worlds, sharing a moment of understanding in a small cabin while the storm raged outside. Jake didn't know what was going to happen next, but for the first time since she had appeared at his door, he wasn't afraid. The next few hours passed in an awkward but peaceful silence. Jake and the alien woman sat on opposite sides of the cabin, stealing glances at each other when they thought the other wasn't looking. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the cabin, things felt calmer than before. Jake tried to go about his normal routine, moving slowly and carefully so he wouldn't startle her. Added wood to the fire, checked his weather equipment, and made some coffee. The woman watched everything he did with intense curiosity, her large eyes following his movements like she was trying to memorize every detail. When Jake made his coffee, the smell filled the cabin. The woman's nose wrinkled again, but this time, it seemed like she was interested rather than disgusted. She made some of those musical sounds, and Jake got the feeling she was asking a question. He held up his coffee mug and said coffee several times, then pretended to drink it and made a satisfied sound. The woman tilted her head, processing this information. She pointed at the mug and tried to repeat the word, but it came out as something like Ko-Fi, with those strange musical tones. Jake nodded encouragingly and gave her a thumbs up. She stared at his thumb for a moment, then tried to copy the gesture. Her long fingers made it look different, but Jake understood what she was trying to do. As the night wore on, Jake noticed the woman was looking weaker. Her skin wasn't glowing as brightly as before, and the damaged parts of her silver clothing were getting worse. Whatever technology kept her warm and healthy was clearly failing. She was trying to hide it, but Jake could see she was struggling. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. Every time he moved toward her, she would tense up, ready to run, even though there was nowhere to go. Jake felt frustrated and helpless. Here was someone who obviously needed help, but he couldn't get close enough to figure out what was wrong. The breakthrough came by accident. Jake was trying to open a can of beans for dinner when the can opener slipped. The sharp edge caught his thumb, and he yelped in pain as blood started flowing. He dropped the can and grabbed his thumb, trying to stop the bleeding. The moment Jake cried out, the woman's whole demeanor changed. She sat up straight, her eyes wide with concern rather than fear. She made urgent sounds and pointed at his hand, then at herself. Jake looked down at his bleeding thumb, then back at her. She was clearly agitated, but not in a scared way. She seemed worried about him. Jake held up his hand to show her the cut, and she made more of those musical sounds. This time, they sounded gentle and caring, like someone trying to comfort a hurt child. She started to move toward him, then stopped herself, looking uncertain. Jake made a decision. He slowly moved closer to her, holding out his injured hand. She watched him approach, and for the first time, she didn't back away. When he was close enough, he held out his hand so she could see the cut clearly. The woman leaned forward and examined his thumb carefully. Her large eyes studied the wound and she made soft, concerned sounds. Then she did something that amazed Jake. She reached into a part of her silver clothing and pulled out a small device that looked like a pen made of crystal. She held the device up and made questioning sounds, pointing at his cut. Jake realized she was asking permission to help him. He nodded, not really knowing what else to do. The woman carefully touched the crystal device to his cut, and it began to glow with a soft blue light. Jake felt a strange tingling sensation, like tiny electric shocks, but not painful. The bleeding stopped immediately, and he watched in amazement as the edges of the cut began to come together. Within seconds, the wound was completely healed. Not even a scar remained. Jake stared at his thumb in disbelief. Flexed it, pressed on it, examined it from every angle. It was perfect, like he had never been cut at all. He looked up at the woman, who was watching his reaction with what looked like pride and satisfaction. "Thank you," Jake said, pointing at his healed thumb, and then at her. She seemed to understand the meaning, even if she didn't know the words. She made a soft sound and touched her chest, then reached out and gently touched his hand. The moment her skin touched his, Jake felt something incredible. It was like a warm wave washing over him, and suddenly he could sense what she was feeling. Concern, kindness, and something else that felt like friendship. The fear was still there, but it was much smaller now, pushed aside by her desire to help. The woman seemed to feel it too. Her eyes widened, and she made surprised sounds. She pulled her hand back quickly, but she was looking at Jake differently now. The terror was gone from her expression, replaced by curiosity and something that might have been hope. Jake realized this was a turning point. She had seen him hurt, and had helped him just like any human would do, and he had let her touch him without fear. They were both scared, lost beings trying to survive a terrible storm, but they had found a way to help each other. "I'm Jake," he said again, pointing to himself. Then he pointed to her and raised his eyebrows in a question. The woman understood. She put her hand on her chest and made those beautiful musical sounds that were her name. Jake couldn't even begin to pronounce it, but he tried anyway. His attempt made her make a sound that Jake was pretty sure was laughter. The sound was like wind chimes mixed with flowing water. It made Jake smile. She tried to say Jake again, and this time it sounded closer to his actual name. Jake clapped his hands together and nodded enthusiastically. She copied his clapping, and soon they were both laughing in their own ways. For the first time since this whole crazy situation began, Jake felt like things might be okay. They couldn't talk to each other properly, and they came from completely different worlds, but they had found something in common. They both understood pain and kindness and the desire to help someone in need. The woman seemed to be feeling better too. Her skin was glowing a little brighter and she was sitting up, straighter. Jake wondered if helping him had somehow helped her too, or if it was just because she wasn't scared anymore. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the cabin, two beings from different worlds had found a way to connect. Jake didn't know what would happen when the storm ended, but right now in this moment, he wasn't afraid. He was curious, excited, maybe even a little bit honored to be part of something so incredible. The woman reached into her clothing again and pulled out another device. This one flat and square. She touched it, and it began to glow with soft light. Jake leaned forward, wondering what she was going to show him next. The flat device in the woman's hands began to glow brighter, and suddenly the air above it shimmered. Jake blinked hard, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him.
Ow.
But the shimmer grew stronger until it formed a three-dimensional picture floating. In the air, it was like a hologram, but clearer and more detailed than anything Jake had ever seen. The image showed what looked like a city, but it was unlike any city on Earth. The buildings were tall and curved, flowing like water frozen in time. They seemed to be made of the same material as the woman's clothing, shifting between different colors as Jake watched. Strange vehicles moved through the air between the buildings, and Jake could see figures walking around that looked like the woman sitting across from him. Jake's mouth fell open. He was looking at an alien world, an actual alien civilization. The woman watched his reaction carefully, then touched the device again. The image changed, showing what looked like the landscape of purple and blue plants under a sky that had two suns. The beauty of it took Jake's breath away. "Your home?" Jake asked, pointing at the image, and then at her. The woman nodded, understanding his gesture even if she didn't know the words. She made those musical sounds that Jake was starting to recognize as her way of speaking. Then she touched the device again, and the image changed to show her world from space. Jake could see it was a planet, but it looked sick. Parts of it were brown and gray, instead of the vibrant colors he had seen before. The woman's expression became sad as she showed him more images. Jake saw what looked like storms and disasters, dead plants and empty cities. Her whole planet seemed to be dying. She pointed at the images, then at herself, making urgent sounds. Jake got the feeling she was trying to tell him something important. Then, she did something that amazed him even more. She pointed at the device, then at Jake, making questioning sounds. Jake realized she was asking if he wanted to show her something. He nodded eagerly and pulled out his laptop. The woman's eyes went wide when Jake opened his computer. She had shown him incredible technology, but she seemed just as fascinated by his simple laptop as he was by her hologram device. Jake opened his weather research files and showed her the data he had been collecting at first. She just stared at the screen, trying to understand what she was seeing. But when Jake showed her temperature graphs and storm patterns, her whole body language changed. She leaned forward, making excited sounds, pointing at the screen and then at her own device. Jake realized she was a scientist too. She understood what his data meant, and she was excited to see it. She touched her device again, and new images appeared in the air. This time they showed weather patterns, but not from Earth. Jake was looking at storm systems from her planet, and they looked remarkably similar to the ones he studied. For the next hour, they shared their research with each other. The woman showed Jake images of her planet's climate and weather systems, while Jake showed her his Earth data. Despite not speaking the same language, they were communicating perfectly through science and mathematics. Numbers and patterns were the same no matter what world you came from. Jake began to understand why she was here. Her planet was dying from climate change, and she was part of a team studying other worlds to find solutions. She wasn't an invader or a threat. She was a scientist trying to save her home, just like Jake was trying to understand Earth's changing climate. The woman seemed to realize Jake understood her mission. She made grateful sounds and touched the device again. This time, the images showed her team, other beings like her working with advanced equipment. But then the images changed to show what looked like a crash. Jake saw a damaged spacecraft, pieces scattered across the snowy landscape. She pointed at the image, then at herself, then toward the window where the storm was still raging. Jake understood. She had been in that crash. Her team was probably looking for her, but the storm was too strong for them to search safely. Jake felt a surge of sympathy for her. She was lost and alone, just like he would be if he crashed on an alien planet. He pointed at the image of her team, then made a questioning gesture. She nodded sadly and made sounds that Jake was sure meant, "I don't know," in her language. Then, Jake had an idea. He went to his radio equipment and turned it on. The woman watched curiously as he adjusted the dials, trying to pick up any unusual signals. For a while, there was nothing but static and the normal emergency channels. But then Jake heard something strange, a rhythmic beeping that didn't match any Earth technology. The woman's eyes lit up when she heard the sound. She made excited noises and pointed at the radio, then at herself. Jake was pretty sure he had found her team's distress signal. He handed her the radio microphone, and she spoke into it in her musical language. For several minutes, she talked rapidly into the radio, occasionally pausing to listen to responses. Jake could hear other voices coming through the static, and they sounded relieved and excited. The woman was crying, though her tears looked different from human tears, more like liquid light. When she finished talking, she turned to Jake with an expression of pure gratitude. She pointed at the radio, then at him, making thankful sounds. Jake understood that he had helped her contact her team, and they now knew she was safe. But as happy as she was, Jake could see sadness in her expression too. She looked around his cabin, at the fire, at the blankets, at him. Jake realized she was thinking about leaving. Her team could find her now, but that meant their time together was coming to an end. The woman seemed to have the same thought. She reached into her clothing and pulled out a small device, about the size of a smartphone, but made of the same crystal material as her healing tool. She held it out to Jake, making soft sounds. Jake took the device carefully. It was warm too, the touch, and seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The woman pointed at it, then at herself, then at Jake. She was giving him something. A gift, or maybe a way to stay in contact. Jake looked at the device, then at her. I understood that. This was more than just a tool. It was a symbol of the connection they had made, to beings from different worlds, who had found common ground in science and kindness. The woman stood up and walked to the window. The storm was starting to calm down, and Jake could see the first hints of dawn in the sky. Soon her team would be able to reach her, and she would go back to her world. But Jake knew that this experience would stay with him forever. He had learned that intelligence and curiosity existed throughout the universe, that kindness was a universal language, and that even the most different beings could find ways to understand each other. As he watched her looking out at the clearing sky, Jake realized his life would never be the same again. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the clouds when Jake first saw the lights. He had been awake for hours, sitting by the window with the alien woman, both of them watching the storm slowly die down.
Oh.
The wind had stopped howling, and the snow was falling more gently now, like nature was finally tired of being angry. The woman had been quiet for the past hour, occasionally speaking into the crystal device Jake had given her, the radio frequency 4. Her team was getting closer, and Jake could hear the excitement in their voices, even though he couldn't understand their words. But with each radio call, the woman seemed to grow more sad. Then Jake saw them. 3 points of light moving across the sky, too bright and too fast to be airplanes. They moved in perfect formation, leaving no trails behind them, and they were heading straight for his cabin. Jake's heart started beating faster. He was about to meet more aliens, and he had no idea what to expect. The woman saw the lights too, and made excited sounds. She stood up quickly and ran to the window, pressing her face against the glass. The lights were getting bigger and brighter, and Jake could see they weren't just lights at all. They were spacecraft, sleek and beautiful, made of the same shifting material as the woman's clothing. "Your people?" Jake asked, pointing at the ships. She nodded and made happy sounds, but tears were flowing down her face again. Jake understood why she was crying. She was happy to see her team, but she was sad to leave. In just a few hours, they had become friends despite coming from completely different worlds. The ships landed softly in the snow outside Jake's cabin, making no sound at all. Jake had expected them to be loud like helicopters or jets, but they set down as quietly as falling leaves. Steam rose from the snow where they touched down, and Jake could see figures moving inside the transparent sections of the craft. The woman turned to Jake and made a series of sounds that were clearly meant to be instructions. She pointed at him. Then at the door, shaking her head. Jake understood she was telling him to stay inside, probably for his own safety. Her people might not be as trusting as she had become, but the woman had other ideas. She took Jake's hand and led him toward the door. She was taking him with her to meet her team. Jake felt nervous and excited at the same time. This was really happening. He was about to become the first human to officially meet beings from another world. When they stepped outside, Jake was amazed by how warm it felt. The air around the ship seemed to be heated, melting the snow in a wide circle. The spacecraft were even more beautiful up close, looking like they were made of liquid metal that constantly shifted and flowed. A door appeared in the side of the nearest ship. Though Jake hadn't seen it open, 3 figures stepped out, and Jake got his first look at more aliens. They were all similar to the woman, but different in small ways. One was taller, another had darker skin, and the third had markings on their face that looked like tattoos. When they saw Jake, all 3 stopped, moving and stared. Jake could feel their surprise and maybe fear. The woman quickly moved between Jake and her team, making rapid sounds in their musical language. She was clearly explaining what had happened and vouching for Jake's safety. The tallest of the 3 aliens stepped forward and made questioning sounds. The woman responded by showing them Jake's healed thumb, pointing at the cabin and making gestures that Jake recognized as her telling the story of how they had helped each other. She showed them the blanket she was still wearing and made eating motions to explain how Jake had fed her. Slowly, the tension in the air began to ease. The 3 aliens looked at Jake with curiosity instead of fear. The one with the facial markings stepped forward and made a sound that seemed like a greeting. Jake waved and said hello, feeling foolish but not knowing what else to do. The tall alien pulled out a device similar to the woman's and began scanning. Jake from a distance, lights played over his body, and Jake tried not to move. The alien made satisfied sounds and nodded to the others. Jake assumed he had passed some kind of safety check. The woman turned to Jake and handed him another device. This one different from the communication tool she had given him earlier. This device was smaller and seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as his heartbeat. She pointed at it, then at herself, then at the sky, making sounds that Jake thought meant, "Remember me," or "Don't forget." Jake took the device carefully and nodded. "I won't forget," he said, even though he knew she couldn't understand the words. But somehow Jake thought she understood the meaning anyway. The tall alien made urgent sounds, pointing at the sky. Jake looked up and saw that more clouds were gathering. Another storm was coming, and they needed to leave soon. The woman's team couldn't stay much longer. The woman looked around at Jake's cabin one more time, as if she was trying to memorize everything. Then she walked back to Jake and did something that surprised him. She reached out and hugged him, just like a human would. Her body felt different, lighter and warmer than a human's, but the gesture was unmistakably one of friendship and gratitude. When she pulled away, she made soft sounds that Jake was sure meant thank you and goodbye. Jake felt his eyes getting wet, and he didn't care. He was saying goodbye to a friend, and it didn't matter that she came from another world. "Thank you too," Jake said, "for everything. For showing me I'm not alone in the universe." The woman seemed to understand the emotion in his voice, even if she didn't know the words. She touched the communication device in Jake's hand and made sounds that might have meant, "I'll call you or we'll talk again." The aliens began moving toward their ships. The woman was the last to go, turning back several times to wave at Jake, when she finally disappeared into her spacecraft. Jake felt more alone than he had ever felt in his life. The ships rose silently into the air, their lights growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared into the cloudy sky. Jake stood in the melted snow for a long time, holding the devices the woman had given him and wondering if any of it had really happened. But when he looked down at his thumb, the one that had been completely healed by alien technology, he knew it was all real. And when he looked at the communication device in his hand, still pulsing with that strange light, he knew his life had changed forever. Jake walked back into his cabin, which suddenly felt huge and empty. But he wasn't sad anymore. He was excited. Somewhere out there among the stars, he had a friend. This was only the beginning of something incredible. He sat down at his laptop and began typing his report. The world needed to know that we weren't alone, that the beings out there among the stars weren't so different from us after all. They felt fear and kindness and curiosity, just like humans did. And if two beings from different worlds could become friends in a single night, maybe there was hope for the entire universe. The communication device pulsed softly on the table beside him, and Jake smiled. His friend was out there somewhere, probably telling her own people about the strange human who had saved her life during a blizzard. And someday, when the time was right, maybe they would meet again.